How are you doing? Good? Okay, amazing. I just had a decaf coffee, so I'm energized and ready to go. There are a lot of different things that we could talk about, but I wanted to get a sense of what matters most to you so that I can skip over the things that are less relevant and focus on what's going to be more applicable for all of you. So, quick question. I'm assuming that everybody here is in sales leadership, but put your hand up if you're in sales or revenue leadership. Okay. And if you're a mid-level manager on the front lines, managing reps. Okay, perfect. And if we think about the number one problem that you're focusing on, how many people would say it's building pipeline? Not too much, but a couple folks. And how many people would say it's about converting the pipeline that we do have, making sure that we have good conversion rates? Okay. Sales efficiency, sales productivity in general? Okay. Is there anything that I missed? It's like a really key metric that you're all focused on? Pardon me?
Closing the deal.
Closing the deal. Okay, so I would put that under conversion rates. Okay, perfect. Good. So I want to start with a bit of a story, because before I started Chorus, I spent 8 years as a consultant, it was a really amazing part of my life. But one of the experiences that stood out the most was living on a gold mine in interior Alaska. And if you can imagine, I can't grow a beard right now, but back then I was in my mid-20s, and I was probably the only person within a 200-mile radius that couldn't grow a full beard and didn't have a full beard. And when I was on that gold mine, I had one job, which was to improve the performance of the mill. And so I'm assuming that most of you haven't spent time on gold mines. But essentially what happens is that there's two parts of the operation. There's the first part, which goes out, blows up the rock, loads it onto a really expensive truck, hauls it a couple of miles, and then drops it at the foot of the mill. And then there's a second part of the operation, which takes that rock, grinds it down, and actually extracts the gold. And there's one shot to get the gold out. It goes through the mill, and whatever you get out as it's going through the mill is what you get out. And you literally throw out all the rest of the gold that you didn't extract. So you've got one shot. And there was a lot of learning that came out of what we figured out would get you the most gold. And I'm happy to talk to folks about it during the break if you're interested. One of them was slow down. Because as things rush through, you actually end up losing most of the gold. So you slow down, you can get the yield up, you can get the conversion rates up. And what struck me when I started really digging into revenue teams and go-to-market teams is that everybody was focused on activity. It was about do more, do more, do more, do more, get it into the pipeline. And this idea that when you get somebody on the phone, when you get a prospect into a meeting, you actually have one shot to have that effective meeting and to close on that next step. Whatever that next step is, it's not the deal, it's whatever the next step is for that buyer to take them one step down. And if you don't have any data, if you don't actually know what's happening, if you don't know what folks are doing, it's very difficult to do that. So this is the mentality and the approach that I take when we work with our customers and we build our product. So why does Chorus.ai have something to say about this? We were founded in 2015. We've raised over $55 million in venture capital. We work with some of the highest growth sales teams in the country, Qualtrics, now SAP, Zoom, Adobe, many, many more. If you've had a chance to look at the Zoom S1, you'll get a sense of their sales productivity numbers, which are phenomenal. And I'm proud to say that we had a small part to play in helping them with that. One other thing is we love to share the insights, and so if you find something that particularly resonates with you or with your teams, we'd love for you to take a picture of it, share it on social media, on LinkedIn, and tag Chorus.ai, and one lucky winner will get a pair of AirPods to take home, and we'll announce the winner after the fireside chat. So sales conversations are obviously important. We know that we want most of our sellers to be spending a large chunk of their time talking to prospects, talking to customers. For a 100-person sales team, they're likely spending 10,000 hours every quarter talking to your prospects. A 100-person sales team probably costs your business upwards of $15 million in fully loaded cost. And if you're like most of our customers, there's a 4 to 5x expectation on return, right, bookings on that cost. So upwards of $50 to $60 million in ARR or bookings. And all of those conversations are the fundamental driver of revenue. So they matter. We have a lot of friends. I saw Barry Traylor was here, CSO Insights, many, many other folks. We know that 57% of reps are missing quota, and that data shows that trend has been going up. We know that for most businesses with a 20% win rate, that means that 80% of deals aren't closing. And based on data that we did, when you add up all the cost of the marketing and the data and the sales and the tools, it costs over $100 a minute to get a prospect into a meeting, into a first meeting with a sales rep. $100 a minute. So this is all context to say, like, this stuff really matters. So at this point, we've now collected and analyzed millions and millions of calls, and what I'm going to try to do is step out and share some high-level learnings that you can take back to your teams, and perhaps start a conversation about, what are we doing, and how could we get better? And the one thing that I do want to call out is that some of these might sound like silver bullets, and I want to be really clear that there are no silver bullets. So our very best customers, the very best companies don't focus on silver bullets, they focus on a process where they define, this is what great looks like, this is what we think great looks like, let's run through it and see how people are performing, let's learn and let's continue improving. And when you look at the data, these are some of the things that we see coming out of the data. So as you look at this data, I'd love for you to ask yourselves, what would the process look like within our own company to figure out what gets us to these type of insights or to these types of data points? So it's based on the 10 highest growth companies that we work with. So we sort of talked about. So let's start with cold calling. I'm going to ignore sequencing for a second and focus on what's the anatomy of a successful cold call. For a successful cold call, we found that they average about 7.5 minutes, which isn't a ton of time when you think about it. They start out with a rep monologue where they're engaging the prospect. And what we found was that they don't go longer than 35 seconds. And 35 seconds, if we were to actually count it out, is a pretty long time, as it is. So keep it short. The rep asks 4 questions across 7.5 minutes on average. And so my question would be, what are the 4 questions that your reps are asking, and how intentional are they? Prospects typically ask 2, and they create one engaging moment. And an engaging moment is a question that the rep asks that gets the prospect to really open up. And I can't tell you what that question is for you. We can figure this out for our customers. But the interesting thing about an engaging question is that it actually conflates 2 different things. One is that you've built enough rapport and trust with the prospect that they are going to open up to you. And number 2 is that you ask the right question that gets them to open up. And so we see that there's at least one engaging moment on that call. And then lastly, it's a balanced conversation. So the reps are talking about 40 to 55% of the time. They close on the meeting for the account executive. Discovery and demos. So Zoom is one of our customers. We've spent a lot of time working with them to understand the impact of video. And I like to say that there's no such thing as a free lunch. I feel as though this might be the closest that we can get to a free lunch. The data shows conclusively that when everybody on a meeting has their video turned on, the win rates go up. We've talked about why that might be. I would love to hear your thoughts. The most common ones that we hear from our customers are, number 1, it's easier to build trust and rapport because you can see the person. If they look professional, if they act professional, it goes a long way. And number 2, how many of us are multitasking during conference calls? Right? Never happens. I never do it personally. But it's a lot harder to do that if you're looking at somebody in the eyes. And so obviously this is great for Zoom, but it's also great for our customers because with software like Chorus, you can figure out, well, how many of our reps are actually turning video on or not. Otherwise, just imagine something that simple you don't know. I'm really hoping that Zoom puts this into their analytics because it's so groundbreaking. Number two is, we always talk about discovery, right? How many folks have this fear that your reps are gonna show up and throw up, right? Or get right into the demo, right? Or there's that prospect that just wants you to go right into the demo. Well, what we found was that on closed-won deals, there is a big upfront discovery portion, and the reps push off going into that demo. And when they do on the first call, it's enough to scratch the itch. It's not training, right? We're not training the prospect on the first call on how to use the software. We're not going through a full demo, but it's enough to scratch the itch. And then it's about getting them onto a longer conversation once you have all of that context to do something more personalized. The first insight here is built on that. So what makes an effective discovery call? This is going to be the second potential free lunch for you. How many folks have been trying to multi-thread more on accounts, right? And encourage your reps like, hey, don't just single thread, don't just go for one person, try to get many different people in the account involved. The most interesting thing that we found in our data was that it's not about multi-threading the account, it's about multi-threading the call. So let's say that if we're trying to sell Chorus, who's involved in that? The VP of sales would be involved in that. The head of enablement would be involved in that. Sales operations would be involved in that. Sales managers or sales directors would be involved in that conversation. If we have one conversation with the VP of sales, one conversation with the head of enablement, one conversation with sales managers, one conversation with sales ops, we're gonna lose that deal, even though we're quote unquote multi-threading. What we need to do is help the organization have the conversations they need to have to make a decision. And so when you have two or more people from the prospect in that same meeting room, the job of the rep is about stepping back and facilitating the conversation that they need to have. And you're much better off trying to have them have that conversation with the rep listening in than, how many of you have heard, something like, oh, let us circle up internally and have a debrief and we'll get back to you. The worst thing that can happen. You have no visibility into what's happening. And so when we see, if you have a rep that's just having meetings with one person at a time, try to get them to get more people involved. And if they won't, that's probably a pretty good sign that that deal's not going as well as you think it is. We talked about engaging questions. Engaging questions, again, matter a lot. So look for moments where prospects are getting engaged and they're responding during that discovery. And then we talked about ending with a quick demo. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over some of these. The one on the right, the third point, is the one that sticks out the most to me. That during a demo, one question every 4 minutes and one engaging question every 8 minutes. How many of you demo software when you sell your product? I know it's not for everybody, if you're selling services and whatnot, but especially in product demos, we've seen in the data that a rep can have a 35-minute demo with a prospect speaking for a total of maybe 1 minute. And it happens a lot more often than you might think. The most common question is something like, does that make sense? Yup. Okay, next page, right? So the very best reps are engaging, right? If they spend 4 minutes, they're asking a question that's actually getting a response. It's more than just, does that make sense? And they're getting the prospect to engage deeply once every 8 minutes. So what's an example of a question like that? I'm sure that you have much better ones than I do, but for Chorus, it might be, can you see how that would change the way that you're currently working with your reps on deals? And if the answer is yes, fantastic. If the answer is no, you're still going to learn something. Oh, well, tell me why not. And then you get them to open up. So you're starting to surface those objections during the demo, and you're seeing if the dots are connecting in the minds of the prospect. Coaching reps. This is obviously really close to my heart. One of the things that surprised us when we went to market was that the very top performers in every one of our customers ended up being the heaviest users of Chorus. So think about this. This is a product that, at its most fundamental, records every one of your sales conversations and then lets reps go back and listen to them, which most of them never had access to before, right? Or if they did, they were doing it on their iPhones or something like that. What we found was that the top reps really want to go back and listen to what their prospects said before they follow up. They want to listen to what happened in the previous meeting when it's 3 weeks later and they have that next big meeting with a larger audience. Our top managers are spending 12 hours a month reviewing calls. And the more time they spend reviewing calls, the higher their team performance goes. And so we wanted to dig in and say, well, what are they looking for? When they're in Chorus and they're looking for those key moments to coach on, what are they looking for? The first one is competition. We did research with some of our customers. You probably actually all know this customer. They're in a very, very competitive industry. And they had an initiative. And the initiative was, well, it started with one piece of data that we surfaced for them. And the data point was that your win rate in a deal where you talk about your competition is 2 times higher than your average win rate. Put your hand up if that surprises you. Your win rate when we're discussing competition is 2x what it normally is. The reason, it turns out, is that what's the number one reason we lose deals? No decision, right? The number one reason we lose deals is to no decision. It's not the right time, we don't have the right folks, there's no urgency, there's no budget. If somebody walks into a conversation and says, hi, we're talking to you and 2 of your direct competitors. And by the way, when you look at when competition comes up in those calls, it comes up in the first 10 minutes of the first call. That's what the data shows. It's not that you're having this conversation and all of a sudden the competition just swoops in like during procurement and the rep needs to handle this objection. It's no, you've got a buyer that is in a buying cycle and they're evaluating your space, and so the likelihood of that deal closing is going to be very high. And what we found was that reps were handling those situations completely differently. And so they said, if this is going to be our highest win rate deal and our most likely to buy folks, we need to spend disproportionate attention in really understanding what happens. And so we used Chorus, we used a whole bunch of other things. We actually found out what the reps were saying in competitive won deals and competitive loss deals. And equally important, they were listening to what was resonating with prospects. What were the words that the prospects were saying back about what was making them lean one way versus the other? And then they built a best practice. They flew the entire company to the headquarters, and they spent a full day training them and certifying them on this is how we handle competitive deals. 3x improvement in their competitive win rate. So if you're in competitive markets, it was a real eye-opener. Number 2 is around objections. We all know that there are objections. It turns out that reps handle these situations very, very differently. So managers want to know, how are we handling these key objections? Pricing, I think that this goes without saying. A lot of reps, when you listen to the calls and nobody else is in there, almost sound apologetic when they're providing the pricing. And I think that Bill was talking about this in the previous session, but if you think about discounting, just as an example, we did some analysis around discounting, and what we found was that there's a very good prediction of what will lead to a discounting conversation. And that is how many other words you use around the word pricing. So if somebody asks me how much does Chorus cost, and I say it's $1,500 per rep per year. Don't really need to give you more context than that. But what you find in the data is that reps are saying, well, generally our list price is $1,500 per rep per year. And then what's the first thought? When you hear a qualifier in front of pricing, what is your first thought as a buyer? Yeah. Who on earth pays list price? I certainly don't pay list price. So what am I going to pay? Right? And so the more you qualify it, the more you're going to get yourself into a discounting conversation. And then focusing on value and ROI. The other thing that was really interesting, and obviously we don't have the data for companies that aren't using Chorus, but you look at rep self-coaching. For anybody, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have been sales managers. It is really, really hard to have a team of anywhere from 6 to 12 people that are all fighting for your time, all fighting for your attention, all fighting for your help on deals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not scalable to either A, have you join every call and help them through those tricky situations, or B, provide one-on-one coaching for every issue that every rep has. And so what we found was that reps were spending 60% of their time. So they were spending, on average, 15% of their time reviewing their own calls and meetings or reviewing other people's meetings. So about 24 hours a month, which means that reps really want this. They want to get better, they just don't know how. And the easiest way to learn is to be a fly on the wall or virtually shadow a top performer. Imagine that you walk into your current company, it's your first day of work, and we say, Rebecca, for the next 2 weeks, what you're gonna do is virtually shadow Jennifer, who's one of our top 5 performers, one of our most consistent performers, on 10 of her most representative deals that closed last quarter. It turns out that that's a really, really effective way to train people. And so they were spending 40% of their time reviewing other people's calls. They want to learn, they want to get better. It's really hard to do it by just sitting in a classroom. So in summary, number 1, think about your process. What are you doing as a team to define what great looks like, to learn from it, to get better, to improve? There are no silver bullets. Number 2, are you thinking about doing that upfront discovery? Are you measuring how much time people are spending doing discovery before they get into demos? And then are you doing demos with engagement from the prospect at key check-in points? Are you multi-threading? Are you actually getting more than 2 prospects in a room with you and encouraging them to have that conversation amongst themselves? Are you keeping video on? Have you asked yourself how you want your managers to be spending their time? In the short term, absolutely. Having an amazing manager on every call of a big deal, right? Pull up Salesforce report, sort by deal size, sort by close date. Those are the 10 deals where I want you to spend your time. That's one way. It turns out it's not very scalable if you're a growing company. So how do you want your managers to be spending their time? And are they engaging with their reps in that coaching mindset? And then lastly, are you giving your reps an opportunity to get better? Are you giving them an opportunity to self-coach, especially if they're struggling, and learn from some of your top performers? Lastly, I see that we actually have a couple of minutes, so I'm happy to go to Q&A if folks have some questions or give some time back. But if any of you think that we can help, we're willing to offer a free month of conversation intelligence. You can flip it on. You can see what's actually happening in your team's conversations and decide if that's something that you want to focus on come Q2 or Q3. And aside from that, if you did find something that you enjoyed, please do post on LinkedIn and tag us, and come see us for that pair of AirPods. But thank you very much. Hope you guys enjoyed. Oh my goodness.
If anybody has a question,
What's this?
Throw that at them if they have a question.
I can throw it at them.
You can throw it at them.
Okay. All right, does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Oh, can you throw that far?
There we go.
I'm John Flannery. What's the purpose of doing a demo in the discovery phase?
Yeah, it's a good question.
And then the second thing I just wanted to say is perhaps the worst question you could ever ask somebody is, does that make sense?
So really good question. You know, one of the things that's most difficult about big data analysis is that it doesn't tell you the answer to every question. It's correlation, not causation. So what I can tell you is that for our very best customers, that's what they end up doing. And what we tell most of our customers is you need to have a hypothesis and you need to go test it, right? The data is not going to find something that nobody is doing. And so what we found when we looked at our customers, and like I said, they're mostly SaaS companies. They're mostly mid-market to enterprise. right? So companies like Zoom, Adobe, Qualtrics, MongoDB, Outreach, et cetera, and this is what we're seeing in their data. I think that people want to see a demo, and maybe it's hard for reps to just say, no, I'm not going to show you anything. And so maybe it might be expectation setting, but it's a great question. I'd love to see the data change. Who else has a question? All right, well, we'll give you some time back. Thank you so much, everybody.